John Miller stood on his cabin porch, watching the heavy snow fall through the darkness. The wind howled around him, bending the pine trees that surrounded his isolated home in the Montana wilderness. At 53, with graying hair and a body, still strong from military service, John had grown used to the silence of living alone. 5 years had passed since he left his engineering job with the Army. 5 years of quiet days and lonely nights. He preferred it this way, he told himself. People asked too many questions about his past. John was about to go back inside when he saw a flash of blue light through the trees. It lasted only a second, followed by a dull thud that he felt more than heard. He frowned, reaching for the flashlight he kept by the door. Probably a fallen tree, he muttered to himself, but something felt wrong. The light had been unnatural, almost electric. His curiosity won over caution. John pulled on his heavy coat, grabbed his rifle, and stepped into the storm. The snow was already 6 inches deep and still falling fast. He followed his flashlight beam through the trees, the wind cutting through his clothes. After walking about half a mile, John stopped suddenly. In a small clearing ahead, steam rose from a deep groove in the snow. At the end of this groove sat a metal object about the size of a car. It glowed faintly with a bluish light. "What the hell?" John whispered, approaching slowly with his rifle. Ready. The object was like nothing he had ever seen before. It was shaped like an egg, made of a smooth metal that seemed to shift colors in the light. Parts of it had broken open in the crash, revealing strange technology inside. It wasn't from any government he knew. It wasn't from Earth at all. A spacecraft. The thought filled John with both wonder and fear. Movement caught his eye. Through a crack in the side of the craft, something small was trying to get out. John raised his rifle and slowly lowered it as the being emerged. It was a child. At least, it looked like a child in shape. Small, thin-limbed, with a larger head. But its skin was pale blue with patterns that reminded John of lily flowers. Its eyes were huge, solid black, and blinking against the falling snow. The alien child took one stumbling step forward, then collapsed into the snow. John could see it was hurt, with a dark liquid seeping from a wound on its leg. More alarming, the child was gasping, struggling to breathe earth air. John stood frozen for only a moment. Then decades of training kicked in. Whatever this was, it needed help. He set down his rifle and approached slowly. "It's okay," he said softly, though he knew the creature couldn't understand. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien child tried to move away, its movements weak. Up close, John could see it was wearing something like a thin spacesuit that had been torn in the crash. The child made a sound like bells tinkling, then suddenly went still. Without thinking more, John took off his coat and wrapped the small being in it. He picked up the alien child, surprised at how light it was, and began hurrying back toward his cabin. The wind had grown stronger, erasing his footprints almost as soon as he made them. Back at the cabin, John laid the alien on his couch. The child's breathing was shallow, its blue skin turning a worrying gray color. John had seen enough injuries in war to recognize shock when he saw it. "You need oxygen," he muttered, looking around his cabin. His mind raced through possibilities, using his engineering knowledge. In his workshop, he had an oxygen tank for his welding equipment. John worked quickly, creating a makeshift oxygen mask using plastic containers and tape. He didn't know if the alien child needed pure oxygen or a different mix, but it was better than nothing. After setting up the system, he carefully placed the mask over the small being's face. For a few tense minutes, nothing happened. Then, the alien's chest began to rise and fall more evenly. The gray tinge to its skin faded, the blue color returning. John let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The wound on the child's leg still needed attention. John cleaned it with water and bandaged it as best he could. The blood was purple rather than red, but it seemed to clot like human blood. While tending to the wound, John noticed a small device attached to the child's wrist. It looked like a bracelet made of the same color-shifting metal as the spacecraft. Tiny lights blinked on its surface. John decided not to touch it, fearing it might be important. As night deepened, John sat watching the alien child sleep. His mind filled with questions. Where had it come from? Were there others? Would they come looking for this child? The storm outside grew worse, rattling the windows of the cabin. John added wood to the fire, keeping the room warm. The alien seemed sensitive to cold. Near midnight, the child stirred. Its large black eyes opened, focusing on John with obvious intelligence. The alien tried to sit up, but was too weak. Easy there, John said gently. You're safe here. The child stared at him, then raised a thin, four-fingered hand toward John's face. John hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. The small blue fingers touched his forehead. A jolt ran through John's mind like electricity, but painless. Suddenly, images flashed in his thoughts. Stars, planets, explosions, people with blue skin running, crying, fear, so much fear. John pulled back, gasping. The child lowered its hand, watching him. Something had just happened. Some kind of communication. You're telepathic. John whispered in amazement. The alien child blinked slowly, then touched its own chest. More images came to John's mind, but gentler this time. He saw the child with others like it, playing in fields under a strange purple sky. He felt emotions, happiness, belonging, then terror as the sky darkened with ships. When the connection broke, John sat back in his chair, processing what he had seen. The child wasn't just lost, it was a refugee. I'm going to call you Lily, John said, thinking of the flower-like patterns on the child's skin. And I'm going to help you. Outside, the wind suddenly died down. In the new silence, John heard something that made his blood run cold. The distant sound of helicopter rotors. Someone else had seen the crash. And they were coming. John moved quickly, gathering Lily into his arms. The alien child was still weak, but seemed to understand the danger. Her large black eyes widened at the sound of the helicopters. We need to hide you, John whispered, carrying her to the basement. Years of military paranoia had led him to build a hidden room behind his tool shelves. He shifted the heavy shelf with one hand, revealing a small door. The hidden room was simple. A cot, some emergency supplies, and a ventilation system he had installed himself. John placed Lily on the cot and connected her oxygen mask to a new tank. Stay here. Stay quiet, he said, making a shushing gesture with his finger. Lily blinked slowly, seeming to understand. John closed the hidden door and moved the shelf back into place just as bright lights swept across his windows. He took a deep breath, composed his face, and went upstairs. By the time heavy knocking came at his door, John had a cup of coffee in hand and a confused expression ready. 2 soldiers stood in the snow, with more visible near a black helicopter that had landed in the clearing near his cabin. A woman stepped forward from behind them. She wore a military uniform with commander insignia. John Miller? She asked, her voice sharp and professional. That's me, John replied, keeping his voice even. What brings the military to my doorstep? At this hour? Commander Allison Wright, Special Projects Division, she said, showing identification. We detected an unusual atmospheric event in this area. Did you notice anything strange tonight? Lights in the sky, perhaps? Unusual sounds? John shrugged. Been a snowstorm all evening. I've been inside by the fire. Commander Wright studied his face. Mind if we look around your property? Federal land? John said, sipping his coffee. I can't stop you, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't disturb anything unnecessarily. Wright nodded and turned to her team, giving quiet orders. The soldiers spread out, using handheld devices that beeped and flashed. Former military? Wright asked, noticing John's posture. Army. Engineering Corps, John answered. Got out 5 years ago? Honorable discharge? John's jaw tightened. Not exactly. Wright seemed about to ask more when a soldier called from the tree line. She excused herself and walked over to him. John watched as they examined something in. The snow, his footprints. He had forgotten about them. When Wright returned, her face was harder. You said you stayed inside all evening. I took a short walk earlier, John amended. Needed firewood. Wright pointed to the rifle leaning by the door. With your rifle? For firewood? Bears in these woods, John said, even in winter. The commander didn't look convinced, but before she could press further, her radio crackled. A voice reported finding unusual metal fragments near a disturbed area in the forest. Wright's eyes lit up with excitement. We'll be back, Mr. Miller, she said. Don't go anywhere. After they left, John waited tensely for an hour, watching through the window as lights moved through the forest toward where the spacecraft had crashed. Only when he was certain no one remained near the cabin did he return to the basement. Lily was sitting up on the cot, her small fingers examining the oxygen mask with curiosity. When John entered, she looked up, and he felt a gentle probe at his mind. They're looking for you, John said, sitting beside her. But they didn't find you here. Lily touched his hand. Images formed in John's mind. The spacecraft, other children like Lily, stars exploding. He understood she was trying to explain where she came from and why. Over the next 3 days, John kept Lily hidden while military vehicles and personnel combed the forest. They found the spacecraft and removed it piece by piece. John watched from his window as it was loaded onto trucks and taken away. During this time, Lily grew stronger. She needed less oxygen each day, suggesting she was adapting to Earth's atmosphere. John taught her simple words by pointing to objects and naming them. Chair, he would say, pointing. Sure, Lily would repeat, her voice musical and high. By the 4th day, she could say John, water, and food. Her telepathic abilities made learning easier. When she touched John's forehead, she could see the concepts behind the words. On the 5th day, while most of the military presence had moved, John needed to go into town for supplies. He carefully explained to Lily that she must stay hidden, showing her food and water he left in the hidden room. Stay, he said firmly. I come back. Lily nodded, repeating, Stay, John, come back. The small town was 20 minutes away by truck. As John pushed a cart through the general store, filling it with canned goods and extra blankets, he noticed Commander Wright studying a bulletin board near the counter. John kept his head down, but it was too late. Wright had seen him. Mr. Miller, she said, approaching. Quite a coincidence. Small town, John replied, keeping his voice neutral. Not many places to shop. Wright looked at his cart. Stocking up? Winter's just starting, John said. Better to have too much than too little. The commander nodded, then lowered her voice. What we found in the woods was quite extraordinary. Not from around here, if you understand my meaning. John kept his face blank. Can't say I do? I think you might, Wright said, studying him. The footprints we found led from your cabin directly to the crash site. And back. John's heart raced, but his expression remained calm. Years in war zones had taught him to control his reactions. Like, I said I take walks. Must have been a coincidence. Wright pulled out a small device, similar to what her soldiers had been using. This detects unusual radiation signatures. the kind not found on Earth. She turned it on, and it immediately began beeping near John's coat, the same one he had wrapped Lily in. "Interesting reading from your jacket," Wright said. "Want to explain that?" John thought quickly. "I was a military engineer, commander, worked with all kinds of experimental technology. Radiation exposure comes with the territory." Wright didn't. Looked convinced, but she put the device away. "If you remember anything unusual, or if you notice anything strange, call this number." She handed him a card. It would be better to cooperate than to interfere with a matter of national security. As soon as he finished shopping, John hurried back to his cabin, worried about Lily. He found her safe in the hidden room, but she seemed distressed. When he touched her hand, she showed him images of pain and sickness. John realized she was getting ill. Despite her adaptation to Earth's atmosphere, something was wrong. He needed help, but who could he trust? The military would take her away, experiment on her. Then he remembered Peter Garcia, a former colleague who had been ridiculed out of the scientific community for his theories about extraterrestrial biology. Peter had been right all along. John picked up his satellite phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Peter? It's John Miller. I need your help with something ... unusual. Can you come to Montana? And Peter, don't tell anyone where you're going." Peter Garcia arrived 2 days later, driving an old van loaded with scientific equipment. He was a short man with wild gray hair and bright, eager eyes. When John opened the door, Peter stood there with snow covering his shoulders and a wide smile on his face. "John Miller," Peter said, shaking John's hand firmly. "It's been a long time." "Thank you for coming," John replied, helping Peter bring in his equipment. "And for not asking questions over the phone." Peter laughed. Man who called me crazy for believing in aliens suddenly wants my help with something unusual. I don't need many details." Once inside, John locked the door and closed all the curtains. He looked at his old friend seriously. "What I'm about to show you stays between us. The military is already sniffing around." Peter nodded. "You know, I've never trusted government." "Types. Now, where is it?" John led Peter to the basement and opened the hidden room. Lily was awake, her blue skin paler than before. She sat up when she saw the stranger, her large black eyes wary. Peter froze, his mouth open in shock. For a moment, he said nothing. Then tears filled his eyes. "I knew it," he whispered. "I was right all along." Lily studied Peter, then looked at John questioningly. "Friend," John explained to her. "Peter helped Lily." Peter approached slowly, setting down his medical bag. "May I?" he asked John. John nodded and spoke gently to Lily. "Peter is a doctor. He will help you feel better." Lily seemed to understand and allowed Peter to examine her. Peter worked carefully, taking samples and measurements with strange-looking devices. After an hour, he sat back with a serious expression. "She's mineral deficient," Peter explained. "Her species must require elements that are rare on Earth. I can create a supplement, but I'll need more equipment from my lab. Is it safe for you to go back?" John asked. Peter shrugged. Nobody pays attention to the crazy alien guy anymore. "I'll be quick." While Peter was gone, John sat with Lily. She seemed weaker, but managed to touch his hand. Images flowed into his mind. Another spacecraft, larger than the pod that had crashed. In it, adult beings like Lily were preparing many pods, each with a child inside. The last image was of a female adult, Lily's mother, placing something around Lily's neck before closing the pod door. John looked at Lily's neck and noticed a small pendant he hadn't seen before. It was made of the same shifting metal as the spacecraft. "Your mother," John said, pointing to the pendant. "She gave you this?" Lily nodded. tears forming in her huge eyes. "Mother," she repeated, the word clear despite her musical accent. Far. From John's cabin, deep in the forest, another being watched the military teams from the shadows. Elara, Lily's mother, had followed her daughter's pod to Earth in a smaller vessel. Her landing had been smoother, hidden by the mountain range, but the journey had weakened her severely. Earth's atmosphere burned her lungs, and its gravity felt crushing. She wore a thin breathing mask, but it was failing. Still, she pressed on, following the telepathic link that connected her to her child. Elara had watched in terror as humans discovered her daughter's crashed pod. She had prepared to attack them, to save Lily, when she sensed something unexpected, kindness from one of the humans. Through Lily's mind, Elara felt John's protective thoughts. She had waited, watching, gathering strength for the moment she could reach her daughter. Now, as military patrols thinned out, Elara moved closer to John's cabin. She could sense Lily inside, alive but unwell. There was another human with her now. Not John, but someone else who meant no harm. A storm was building again, dark clouds gathering overhead. Elara used the growing darkness as cover, moving through the trees toward the cabin. Her blue skin, darker than Lily's, helped her blend with the shadows. Every step was painful, every breath a struggle. Back at the cabin, Peter had returned with more equipment and created a mineral solution for Lily. Her condition improved quickly after the first treatment. "She's remarkable," Peter said, watching. Lily explored the hidden room with renewed energy. "Her cells adapt faster than anything I've seen. She's already processing oxygen more efficiently." John nodded. "She learns fast, too. Watch this." He pointed to various objects, and Lily named them correctly. Chair, water, book, Peter. She pointed at each item, then at Peter, who beamed with delight. "Extraordinary," Peter whispered. "But, John, you know they won't stop looking." "That commander, right, you said? She seems determined." "I know," John replied. "But I can't turn Lily over to them. You've seen how the military treats things they don't understand." Peter was about to respond when a loud crash of thunder shook the cabin. The lights flickered, then went out. John immediately reached for his flashlight. "Stay with Lily," he told Peter. "I'll check the generator." Outside, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain poured down, mixing with the snow to create a freezing slush. John trudged to the small generator shed behind his cabin, flashlight beam bouncing through the darkness. The generator had simply shut off from the cold. John reset it and was heading back when his flashlight caught a movement at the edge of the trees. He froze, sweeping the light back. There, leaning against a pine tree, was a tall, thin figure with blue skin. An adult version of Lily. John approached slowly, his heart pounding. The alien woman, he was sure it was a female, slid down the trunk of the tree, clearly exhausted. A breathing mask covered the lower part of her face, but her large black eyes were unmistakably like Lily's. "Hello," John said softly, kneeling beside her. "Are you Lily's mother?" The alien woman looked at him, then slowly reached out her hand. When her fingers touched his forehead, John gasped as a flood of images filled his mind. He saw Lily as a baby, growing up on a beautiful planet with 2 suns. He saw massive ships attacking that planet, saw Elara. He somehow knew that was her name, fighting to get Lily to an escape pod. When the connection broke, John was breathing hard. "You're Elara," he said. "You followed her here." Elara nodded weakly. She tried to stand but collapsed. Her breathing mask was making a warning sound, its lights fading. Without hesitation, John lifted her into his arms. She was taller than him, but surprisingly light, just like Lily. He carried her toward the cabin. Moving as quickly as he could through the storm dot inside, Peter looked up in shock as John entered with Alara. "My God," Peter whispered. "Another one." "Lily's mother," John explained, laying Alara on the couch. "She's in bad shape. The mask she's using is failing." Peter hurried to get his equipment while John went to the hidden room. Lily was sleeping, but her eyes opened when John entered. "Lily," John said gently, "someone is here to see you." He carried Lily upstairs. When she saw Alara on the couch, she made a high-pitched sound of joy mixed with distress. She reached for her mother, and John set her down beside Elara. Mother and daughter touched foreheads, their hands intertwined. A soft glow emanated from their skin where they touched, lighting the dim room. Peter worked quickly to adapt the oxygen system for Alara. John helped, following Peter's instructions, while keeping an eye on the reunited aliens. When Alara's breathing stabilized, she looked at John with gratitude in her large eyes. Her hand reached for his, and he took it without fear. "Thank you," she whispered in a voice like wind through crystal, "for saving my child." John stared in amazement at her first. Spoken English words. Then Alara added something that would change everything. "May I stay too?" John looked into Alara's large black eyes and nodded. "Yes, you can stay. Both of you." The next morning, Peter helped set up a more permanent living space for the aliens in John's spare bedroom. Alara was still weak, but improving with the mineral supplements Peter had created. Lily stayed close to her mother, their hands often touching, sharing thoughts and feelings through their telepathic bond. "I've never seen anything like their biology," Peter told John as they prepared breakfast. "Their cellular structure is incredible. It's adapting to our atmosphere in real time." John glanced toward the bedroom where the aliens rested. "How long before they can breathe normally without help?" "Lily is already almost there. Maybe a few more days. Alara will take longer, maybe weeks. She's been exposed to our atmosphere. Longer without protection." John nodded, his mind on more immediate concerns. "The military is still out there. That Commander Wright doesn't seem like the type to give up easily." As if summoned by his words, the sound of vehicles approaching came from outside. John moved quickly to the window and saw 2 black SUVs pulling up in front of his cabin. "Get them to the hidden room," John told Peter urgently. "I'll handle this." Peter helped Alara and Lily to the basement, while John composed himself. When the knock came, he opened the door with a look of irritation on his face. Commander Wright stood there with 4 soldiers behind her. "Mr. Miller," she said, "we need to talk." "I'm getting tired of these visits, Commander," John replied, but he stepped aside to let them in. Wright's eyes scanned the cabin carefully. "Our sensors detected another anomalous energy signature last night, coming from this area." She held up the same device she had shown him in town. It was beeping softly. "The storm knocked out power all over the area," John said. "Maybe that's what your fancy gadget picked up." Wright walked slowly around the cabin, the device in her hand beeping faster as she approached the basement door. "What's down there?" "Storage, workshop, nothing interesting." Wright nodded to one of her soldiers, who moved toward the basement door. John stepped forward, blocking his path. "You got a warrant, Commander?" "Because last I checked, this is still my home." Wright studied his face. "What are you hiding, Mr. Miller?" "First, footprints leading directly to an alien crash site. Now strange energy readings from your basement." "That's quite a coincidence." Before John could answer, the front door opened, and Peter walked in carrying a box of electronics. He stopped, short, looking surprised at the soldiers. "Oh, sorry, John. Didn't know you had company." Wright turned to Peter. "And you are?" "Dr. Peter Garcia," he answered, setting down his box. "I'm helping John with a project." Recognition flashed in Wright's eyes. Dr. Garcia, the xenobiologist who claimed to have evidence of extraterrestrial microbes in Arctic ice samples? The one who was laughed out of academia? Peter smiled tightly. The very same. Wright looked. Between the two men, her suspicion visibly growing. What kind of project requires a disgraced xenobiologist? Alternative energy, John answered quickly. Peter's got some unconventional ideas about capturing atmospheric electricity. Like what you might have detected during the storm. Peter nodded enthusiastically. Yes, that's exactly right. In fact, I'd be happy to show you my equipment. It's quite fascinating, though somewhat unstable. That's why we're testing it out here. Away from population centers. Wright seemed unconvinced, but before she could question them further, her radio crackled. A voice reported another anomalous energy signature, this one much larger, detected 10 miles north of their location. Wright hesitated, clearly torn between investigating John's basement and pursuing the new lead. Finally, she pointed at John. We'll be back, Mr. Miller, with a warrant next time. She turned to leave, then paused. Whatever you found out there, it belongs to the government now. Interfering with our investigation is a federal offense. After they left, John and Peter waited, tensely until the sound of engines faded completely. That was close. Peter sighed. John nodded grimly. Too close. And they'll be back. He headed for the basement, Peter following Dot in the hidden room. Elara sat on the edge of the cot with Lily beside her. Both looked frightened. Bad humans come, Lily said, her English improving rapidly. Elara reached for John's hand, and when their skin touched, he felt her fear and gratitude mixing together in his mind. They search for us, Elara said slowly, her voice musical despite. The straying. More will come. John sat beside them. We need to move you somewhere safer. But where? Peter paced the small room. I have a cabin in the Colorado mountains. It's remote, hard to find. We could take them there. Will the military be watching your place too? John asked. Peter shook his head. Nobody takes me seriously enough to watch me. That's my one advantage. As they discussed plans, Elara suddenly stiffened. Her eyes widened as she gripped John's arm tightly. Others, she whispered. Others like us. Coming. John looked at her, in shock. More of your people? Here on Earth? Elara nodded, her eyes unfocused as if seeing something far away. Many pods, many children, sent to safe places, but some ... Her voice faltered. Some found by wrong humans. Peter and John exchanged worried glances. Wright's new energy signature, Peter said. 10 miles north. Another landing, John agreed. Or maybe they found one of the pods Elara is sensing. Elara stood shakily, her determination clear despite her weakness. Must help them. All children in danger. John ran a hand through his hair, thinking quickly. We can't just walk into a military operation. They'll have the area locked down tight. But we can't leave them, Peter argued. If Wright gets her hands on them, who knows what they'll do? Lily tugged at John's sleeve. When he looked down, she pointed to the pendant around her neck. Tracker, she said simply. Find others. Elara nodded, touching the similar pendant she wore. Yes, these connect us. Can find all children. John felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had only wanted peace and quiet. In his isolated cabin. Now he was harboring alien refugees and contemplating a rescue mission against the military. Okay, he finally said. Peter will need your van. And we'll need a distraction. They spent the next hours planning. Peter modified his equipment to create what he called an energy mask, a device that would hide Elara and Lily's unique radiation signature from military sensors. John gathered supplies, weapons, and tools that might be useful. As dusk approached, they prepared to leave. John looked around his cabin one last time, knowing he might never return. When he turned to Alara and Lily, he found them both watching him with their large, expressive eyes. "Ready?" he asked. Alara stepped forward and placed her hand gently on his cheek. A telepathic connection formed instantly, but instead of images, John felt pure emotion, trust, hope, and something deeper that made his heart race. "Ready," Alara said, her voice stronger than before. "To save our people." As they loaded into Peter's van and drove away from the cabin, John noticed military helicopters circling in the distance to the north. Commander Wright had found something, or someone, and John was heading straight toward it. The hunt had become a rescue mission. Peter drove the van along dark forest roads, avoiding main highways where military checkpoints might stop them. John sat in the passenger seat, studying a map with a flashlight. In the back, Alara and Lily huddled together, their blue skin glowing faintly in the darkness. "The pendant is pulling stronger this way," Alara said, holding her necklace which tugged like a magnet toward the north. "Close now." They crested a hill and saw the military operation spread out in a valley below. Bright lights illuminated a perimeter of vehicles and tents. Soldiers moved like ants around what appeared to be a small crash site. A damaged pod, similar to the one that had brought Lily to Earth, sat in the center of the activity. "Too many soldiers," John said, lowering his binoculars. "We can't just drive in." Peter parked the van, hidden among thick trees. "My energy mask should hide Alara and Lily from their sensors, but it won't make them invisible to human eyes." John thought for a moment. "We need to know if there's another child down there, and if so, where they're keeping it." Alara placed her hand on John's arm. Through their telepathic connection, he saw a small blue child, frightened and alone, held in a tent near the center of the camp. "There," John said, pointing to a large white tent. "That's where they're holding the child." Peter looked nervous. "How do we get in? There must be 30 soldiers down there." John's military training kicked in as he studied the camp layout. "We need a distraction. Something big enough to draw most of them away." Peter grinned suddenly. "I might have just the thing." He opened a case in the back of the van, revealing several small devices. These were meant to simulate atmospheric anomalies for my research. They can create quite a light show and mess with electrical equipment. "Perfect," John said. "Set them up on the far side of the camp. When they go off, I'll slip in and get the child." "What about us?" Lily asked. "Her." Small hand gripping Alara's, John knelt before them. "You both stay here with Peter. It's safer. I'll bring the child back." Alara shook her head firmly. "I must go. Child will trust me, not you." She touched her pendant. "This will lead exactly." John wanted to argue, but knew she was right. The child would be terrified and might not go willingly. With a human stranger. "Fine," he conceded. "But Lily stays with Peter." 20 minutes later, Peter had planted his devices around the eastern edge of the camp. He returned to the van where Lily waited anxiously and gave John a small radio. "When you're in position, give the signal. I'll trigger the devices." John and Alara made their way carefully down the hillside, staying in the shadows. Alara moved with surprising grace, despite her weakened condition. John carried a backpack with oxygen equipment in case the rescued child needed it. At the edge of the camp, they paused behind a large truck. John keyed the radio. Now. Seconds later, the night sky lit up with brilliant blue flashes on the far side of the camp. Alarms blared as equipment malfunctioned. Soldiers ran toward the disturbance, shouting orders. "Let's go," John whispered. They moved quickly through the camp, ducking between vehicles and tents. Ilara's pendant pulled stronger as they approached the central tent. When they reached it, John carefully cut a slit in the back wall. Inside, they found a makeshift laboratory. Scientific equipment surrounded a small examination table. On it lay a blue child, smaller than Lily, connected to monitoring devices. The child's eyes were closed, but its chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Alara made a soft sound of distress. She rushed to the table, her hands gently touching the child's face. The little one's eyes fluttered open, widening at the sight. Elara. Moved quickly to disconnect the monitoring equipment. We need to hurry. The distraction won't last long. Alara lifted the child, who clung to her weakly. Through their telepathic connection, John felt the child's relief and fear, mixing together. His name is Malin, Alara whispered. He is hurt, but alive. They had just turned to leave when the tent flap opened. Commander Wright stood there, her eyes widening in shock at the scene before her. Miller, she said, drawing her pistol. I knew you were involved. John raised his hands slowly. Commander, please. They're refugees, not invaders. They're just trying to survive. Wright's eyes moved from John to Alara, then to the small child in her arms. Her pistol remained steady. Do you have any idea what you're interfering with? This is the scientific discovery of the century. They're people, John said firmly, not lab specimens. Wright's radio crackled with urgent voices. The distraction Peter had created was causing more chaos than expected. Explosions now sounded from the far side of the camp. In that moment of distraction, Alara stepped forward. Before Wright could react, Alara's free hand touched the commander's forehead. Wright gasped, her eyes going wide as the telepathic connection formed. John could only guess what Alara was showing her. Perhaps the destruction of their homeworld, the desperate plan to save their children, the fear of being hunted and experimented. On dot when Alara broke the connection, Wright stumbled back. Her pistol lowered slightly as confusion and conflict played across her face. They're just looking for a home, John said quietly. They have knowledge, technology that could help humanity. But not if we treat them like this. Wright looked at the child in Alara's arms, then back at John. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she holstered her weapon. You have 2 minutes before I sound the alarm, she said. Go out the back. Take the north access road. I'll make sure it's clear. John stared at her in surprise. Why? Wright's expression hardened. Because what I saw. She paused, looking at Alara. Because some things are more important than orders. Now go, before I change my mind. They didn't wait for her to reconsider. John led Alara and Malin out through the cut in the tent wall. True to her word, Wright had cleared the north road. They ran through the darkness, away from the camp and back toward the waiting van. Peter's eyes widened when he saw the small blue child in Alara's arms. Lily made a sound of joy, reaching for her kind. As they drove away, no alarms sounded behind them. No vehicles followed. 3 days later, they reached Peter's remote cabin in Colorado. It was larger than John's, built into the side of a mountain, with natural caves extending behind it. Perfect for hiding Dot as they settled in, Alara revealed more through their telepathic connection. Dozens of pods had been sent to Earth. Most had landed safely. Already, the children were forming a telepathic network, connecting with each other across distances. This is just the beginning, Peter said excitedly one evening as they sat around the fireplace. A new chapter in human history. John watched, Lily playing with Malin, who had recovered quickly with proper care. Alara sat beside John, her hand occasionally brushing his, sharing thoughts without words. We'll need to find the others, John said, before the military does. Alara nodded. Some humans will fear us. Others will help, like you. And Commander. Right, John added. I still can't believe she let us go. She saw truth, Elara said simply. Hard to fear truth once seen. That night, as Lily and Malin slept in a room Peter had prepared for them, John found Elara standing outside, looking up at the stars. He joined her, following her gaze to a distant point of light. "You're home?" he asked. "Once," she replied. "Now gone." Her hand found his in the darkness. "New home here, if your people allow." John squeezed her hand gently. "It won't be easy. But you're not alone anymore." Elara turned to him, her large eyes reflecting the starlight. "You took in my child when she was lost, gave her safety. Now you help all our children." "Anyone would have done the same," John said. Elara shook her head. "No, not anyone. You special, John Miller." As they stood together under Earth's alien sky, John realized his lonely life had transformed into something extraordinary. He had found not just purpose, but family, one unlike any he could have imagined. And when Elara's hand touched his cheek, sharing emotions too complex for words, John knew he had finally found home too.